Okay, it is time to get started. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Um, so, thank you for joining us, everyone, and welcome. We're really glad to have you here. Before we get started, I just want to give everyone a quick rundown of what to expect today. So, you'll be hearing from our Director of Campaigns, Courtney Fern, and our Senior Staff Attorney, Jake Davis, who's also the lead attorney on this case. And they're going to introduce our clients, Angeline, Savanna, Tasha, Victoria, and Zuri, and they'll walk us through where things currently stand in our case for their right to liberty and release to a sanctuary. And many of you joining us today already submitted questions in the RSVP form, so thank you for doing that. Jake and Courtney are going to do their best to go through as many of those questions as they can after they finish their presentations. And after that, we'll open it up to a live Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout their presentation, just go ahead and drop it into the Q&A section of our Zoom, and we will be monitoring those throughout the course of the presentation, and we'll try to answer some of those as well towards the end of the Zoom webinar. And one more thing before I hand it off to Courtney, who's going to kick us off, I just want to share that this event actually kicks off our World Elephant Month campaign. So we have a lot of really great information, educational content, elephant stories, unique insights, and opportunities to take action coming this month. So if you would like to stay in the loop and get those action alerts, make sure you're subscribed to our emails or following us on social media. And I'll be sending around an email after this Zoom webinar with all of the links that you'll need that we're talking about throughout the course of the webinar today. So keep an eye out for the follow-up email. And yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and hand things off to Courtney.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to just pull up our slides. Um, and you can see the raw state of it. So let me just start playing this. Oh, whoops. There we go. So yeah, as Kelly said, I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for joining us today. And Jake and I will be talking about our case on behalf of the five elephants who are held captive by the Pittsburgh Zoo, or five of the elephants held captive by the Pittsburgh Zoo, and going over who they are and what's been happening to them, as well as Jake will go over the legal status of the case, or the status of the case. Pictured here is Zuri. And I also want to note these photos were taken over a series of days, over different months. Some of them were taken by supporters, some were taken by myself, some were taken by Jake. And so this isn't just like one day in the life of the elephants at the Pittsburgh Zoo. This is what their life has been like. And pictured here is Zuri held in a corridor behind bars in front. That's behind one of the viewing stalls at the Pittsburgh Zoo, one of the two viewing stalls. Our petitions, and pictured here is Savanna. Our petitions are supported by some of the foremost experts in elephant cognition and behavior, including experts who have spent decades studying elephants, both in the wild and in captivity. And I wanted to start with this conclusion from Dr. Keith Lindsay's declaration that was submitted in our original petition against the Pittsburgh Zoo, because I think it provides an important context for everything that I'm going to be talking about. Dr. Lindsay has studied elephants for more than 40 years, primarily in the wild in Africa. After reviewing the conditions of the Pittsburgh Zoo and the lives of the five elephants we're representing, he concluded that the life of the five elephants at the Pittsburgh Zoo is nothing but a succession of boring and frustrating days, damaging to their bodies and minds, and punctuated only by interaction with their keepers. He went on to say that their physical and psychological health has been severely compromised by the sustained deprivation of their autonomy and freedom of movement, and that continuing to hold elephants captive under these conditions is inhumane and cruel. So I want to spend the next few minutes talking about our clients and some of the science underlying this conclusion. Pictured here is Angeline, and I'll start with her. Angeline was born at the Pittsburgh Zoo in July 2008. She's the daughter of Savanna, another one of our clients, and Jackson, the breeding bull held captive at the ICC. and Angeline has spent her entire life in captivity. And we can see the effects that captivity in her behavior. Angeline, like all five of our clients, exhibits stereotypic behavior, repetitive behaviors like pacing or swaying that are associated with chronic boredom, frustration, and stress. Importantly, stereotypic behavior has never been observed in wild elephants. Dr. Bob Jacobs, one of our experts, who's a neuroscientist, explains that these behaviors reflect dysregulation of the brain's motor control circuits and are a form of brain damage. He also explains that chronic stress and environmental deprivation can have much broader effects on an elephant's brain, including areas involved in cognition, memory, and emotion. And that's particularly significant for an elephant as cognitively complex as an elephant. Angeline has spent her entire life in an environment that severely restricts her movement, her choices, and her ability to engage in the kinds of behaviors that are normal for an elephant. And the next slide is going to have a video that was taken, and it shows Angeline chewing on a chain. That's pretty much the only form of enrichment, if you can call it, it's not intended enrichment. That's what she was using it for, because that's all she had. And so I will go there next. And the next client I want to discuss is Savanna, who's Angeline's mother. Savanna's history is very different because she was born in the wild in Africa around 1983. She was captured when she was about 2 years old, imported to the United States, and eventually transferred to the Pittsburgh Zoo in 1992. And she spent now 40 years in captivity. She's had three calves. Her first calf was stillborn. Her son Callie was born in 2000 and later transferred to another zoo and has since sired nine calves in zoos in Kansas and Nebraska. And Angeline, who was born in 2008. Savanna's history is a good example of what our experts mean when they talk about the deprivation of autonomy in captivity. Since she was captured as a calf, virtually every significant aspect of her life has been controlled by humans. Where she lives, where she can go, what and when she eats, which elephant she lives with, whether she's transferred, and whether she reproduces. And we know that having some control over these things matters. Research cited by our experts shows that elephants with less opportunity to choose where they live, how they spend their time, exhibit more chronic stereotypic behavior and higher levels of stress hormones. The difference between the life Savanna was born into and the one she's spent most of her life in is enormous. Wild elephants can be active for as much as 18 hours a day and spend roughly 60% of their waking hours foraging. Savanna spent more than 30 years at the Pittsburgh Zoo, where the outdoor elephant yard is only about 3/4 of an acre. In June, the zoo transferred Savanna and Angeline to the ICC, its offsite breeding facility. And the next clip is a video of Savanna. It was taken by Jake after our hearing in November, and it shows her engaging in very abnormal behavior. And I'll let, at the end, Jake and I will both discuss what it was like seeing the elephants and bearing witness to their suffering. But I'll just quickly say it's astronomically small, how the area that they had inside as well as outside. But um, next, I want to talk about Victoria. Victoria was born at the Pittsburgh Zoo in 1999. Her mother is Moja and her father is also Jackson. In 2014, the zoo transferred Moja to a facility in Oregon, more than 2,000 miles away. Victoria was just 15 at the time, and her younger sister Zuri was only 6. Our experts discussed that separation in their declarations because female elephants naturally live in complex, multi-generational families and maintain long-term relationships. Mothers and daughters will live together their entire lives. Elephants recognize and remember one another. They cooperate, console other elephants when they're distressed, and maintain highly individualized relationships. Victoria and Zuri remained together after Mojo was transferred and continued living with Savanna, Angeline, and Tasha. Then last October, the zoo transferred Victoria and Zuri to the ICC for breeding, separating them from the three other elephants. Sorry, I have major construction going on, and I keep being distracted by pounding and drilling. Uh, Dr. Lindsay concluded that removing Victoria and Zuri from their established social group was psychologically damaging to both of them. And there's broader research showing that transfers are a significant problem for captive elephants. More than 80% of elephants in North American zoos have experienced at least one transfer. Our experts explain that these transferred break relationships and elephants would normally maintain for life, and that transferred elephants exhibit more stereotypic behavior. Victoria and Zuri were transferred specifically for breeding, which brings us to another way captivity restricts their autonomy. They have no control over their reproduction. And this is Zuri. Zuri is Victoria's younger sister. She was also born at the Pittsburgh Zoo in July 2008. Victoria and Zuri and Angeline's birth were documented in a documentary which we have shared on our social media platforms. And it's really heartbreaking to see what both Moja and Savanna went through while giving birth, as well as the the what happened to Angeline and Zuri when they were both born. Zuri was immediately uh, separated from her mother, and we have footage of her reaching for her mother through barred stalls. But as I mentioned, Zuri was only 6 when the zoo transferred her mother, Moja, to Oregon. And at that age, Zuri would naturally still have been growing up with her family and learning from her mother and other females around her. One of the things our experts discuss is allomothering, and that's where female elephants help care for calves. Dr. Lindsay believes that after Mojo was removed, Savanna or Tasha may have taken on that kind of maternal role with Zuri. So when Zuri was transferred to the ICC last October, it may have been the second time she was separated from a mother figure. Our experts also have specific concerns about breeding for both Victoria and Zuri. Neither has ever given birth or raised a calf. Dr. Lindsay explains that they have no experience with the birth process or raising offspring, and now that they've been removed from the other elephants who could have helped them navigate that process. That's particularly concerning given the ICC's breeding history. In 2017, a calf was born there, and they were removed to the Pittsburgh Zoo to be hand raised by keepers, and eventually that calf was euthanized at 3 months old. Another calf, Suni, was born at the ICC in 2021 and died of EEHV in 2024 when she was only 2. At the time we filed our petition, no calf born at the ICC has lived past the age of 3. And Victoria faces an additional concern because she's now 26. Our experts cite research showing increased risk for both mother and calf when an elephant gives birth for the first time after the age of 20. And finally, we have Tasha. Tasha is our oldest client. She was born in the wild in South Africa around 1976 and captured when she was around 2 years old and arrived in Pittsburgh in 1982. She's been held captive at the Pittsburgh Zoo for 44 years. When we filed our case last October, Tasha was living with Savanna, Angeline, Victoria, and Zuri. Then Victoria and Zuri were transferred to the ICC. In June, Savanna and Angeline were transferred there as well, leaving Tasha alone at Pittsburgh. The zoo has since imported 2 elephants from Canada, Carol and Jeannot, who are a bonded pair. Carol was sent to the Pittsburgh Zoo to be held captive with Tasha, while Jeannot was sent to the ICC to breed with the females. So in less than a year, Tasha has lost all 4 of her companions, elephants she has been living with for decades. And Carol was separated from an elephant she was bonded with in order to be placed with Tasha. Our experts emphasize that elephants have individual preferences about their social relationships and under natural conditions exert a high degree of control over their social interactions. Tasha has no such control. She doesn't decide which elephant she lives with, when another elephant leaves, or whether a relationship she's formed is allowed to continue. And this photo shows one of those relationships that's been severed. This is Savanna and Tasha reaching for each other between barred, separated stalls. And I think it's important to keep these relationships in mind when we talk about transfers. The 5 elephants we're representing, who are all living together when we filed our case, have now been divided into 2 facilities. Victoria and Zuri were transferred to the ICC in October. Savanna and Angeline followed in June, and Tasha remains separated from her companions at the Pittsburgh Zoo. And the zoo has also separated another bonded pair, Carol and Jeannot, as part of its breeding program. Our experts look at these decisions from the perspective of the individual elephants. These elephants have preferences about who they spend time with. They remember other elephants and form relationships that can last for decades. In captivity, they don't control whether these relations are allowed to continue. And I just want to show two photos that give you a sense of how small the space is in the barn and sort of what the lives were like for the elephants before they were transferred and what it continues to be like for Tasha and now Carol. This is Angeline and Savanna in one of the viewing stalls, and you can see how small it is. It barely holds, two elephants. And there are two of these stalls, and then a sort of larger family room is what they call it. Um, and this is a photo of Angeline, Savanna, and Tasha, and you can see Tasha separated. She's in a small corridor behind one of the viewing stalls. And this is the outdoor yard, and this photo is a little deceptive. It makes it look larger. The front half, or closest uh, to us, is typically filled with water. And this is the outdoor yard at the Pittsburgh Zoo. And as I mentioned, it's only about 3/4 of an acre. And if you can imagine, this is where Angeline, Zuri, and Victoria lived their entire lives. Like, this is all they had for decades. This is all Savanna and Tasha had for decades. And at times, there were even more elephants when Jackson was there breeding, when Callie was there. Um, and the indoor barn is incredibly small and divided into stalls and other spaces and only has concrete flooring. And during the Pittsburgh winters, the elephants can spend significant periods of time inside. There's essentially no opportunity for natural foraging. They're primarily given hay along with fruit, vegetables, and some browse. And again, Dr. Jacobs estimates that an elephant could explore essentially every aspect of this outdoor yard in about 10 minutes. The ICC is physically different, but there are some important things to understand about it. While the overall property is more than 900 acres, the elephants do not have access to that space. They're held in barns and a series of small outdoor paddocks. And importantly, the ICC is not a sanctuary, despite all attempts by the Pittsburgh Zoo to describe it that way. It is a breeding facility. So while the Pittsburgh Zoo and the ICC are different environments, neither gives these elephants the ability to exercise meaningful control over their lives. And that's really the thread that runs through all five our client stories. Angeline has never known anything other than captivity. Savanna and Tasha were taken from the wild as calves. Victoria and Zuri were separated from their mother and later from their established social group. All five have exhibited stereotypic behavior, and today, every major aspect of their lives continues to be controlled by humans: where they live, where they can go, who they live with, and whether they reproduce. And those are some of the fundamental interests at the center of our case. And with that, I will turn it over to Jake. And Jake, just let me know when to go to the next slide. Oh, one more, sorry. This is a photo I took of Tasha last in June of this year. This is when I was able to see Carol was there. She was separated, but you can see the barrenness of this yard. This is the edge, sort of near where the barn is, and behind you can see a construction site, which she is living right next to. And now I will turn it over to Jake.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Kelly. And thank you all for attending this webinar. We greatly appreciate your support, and it's your support that makes this work possible. So I just want to say thank you one more time. And I'll give you a short breakdown of the case timeline and then the reason that the court gave for denying our habeas petition at the lowest court in Pennsylvania. But on October 21st, 2025, we filed our petition in Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is located. And along with that petition, we had declarations submitted by the world's foremost elephant scientists, which Courtney alluded to. And you can see the list of those experts underneath that October 21st banner. I want to make special mention of Dr. Joyce Poole, who is perhaps the foremost elephant scientist in the world, kind of like the godmother of elephant science. You might analogize her to Jane Goodall in the space of elephant understanding. And then I also want to point out a relatively new declarant for our case, Brett Mitchell, who runs the Elephant Reintegration Trust out of South Africa. And Brett and his team have successfully rewilded over a dozen elephants from zoos and circuses. And the reason he has submitted a declaration in this case and will continue into the future is because if we prevail, we would like to ask the court to allow Brett to come to the States and evaluate these elephants for potentially a rewilding scenario where they would be taken back to their native country and they would be given space to slowly acclimate to native environments. And then one day, if everything goes according to plan, be released into the wild. So it's really cool that Brett has stepped up and submitted a declaration in our case. But all of our declarants are world renowned. And as Courtney mentioned, we have neuroscientists among the group and individuals who have been studying elephants both in captivity and in the wild for longer than I have been alive. So, along with our habeas corpus petition, we filed what's called a petition for special and preliminary injunctive relief. And we filed this because shortly before we filed the petition, we became made aware that two of the elephants, Victoria and Zuri, who are sisters, were being sent to the strategically named International Conservation Center, which is little more than the zoo's offsite breeding facility. And so that petition for special relief was an attempt to stop that transfer, keep the elephants with their herd until the case was resolved. Courtney, you can jump to the next slide. So we were afforded a hearing on that special petition in front of Judge Alan Hertzberg on November 10th, who heard arguments that I made and then arguments made by the zoo. And ultimately, he denied the request to keep Victoria and Zuri at the Pittsburgh Zoo, and he did so without providing a reason, which was disappointing. He basically said, for the reasons given by counsel, referring to the zoo's attorney, he was going to deny the request, and then he signed an order that they had prepared for him. You would like to see more from a judge. You would like to see a little more critical thinking than just blanket deference. So, nonetheless, because those two elephants were sent to the International Conservation Center, we filed a second habeas corpus petition in Somerset County, where the ICC is located. And it was substantively similar to the petition we filed in Allegheny County, but we spent a lot more time on the horrors of captive breeding. And as we wrote in the petition, through the declarations of our experts, the relocation of these elephants destroys social bonds. It was psychologically damaging to both Victoria and Zuri. Since neither of those elephants had yet to give birth, they were going to be forced to experience the birthing process and raising offspring without the help of other elephants. Now, in the wild, elephants that give birth have a group of elephants around them, helping them through that process. When the calf is born, that calf is raised not by a single mother, but by a team of elephants, including grandmothers, aunts, sisters, cousins. It really does take a village of elephants, if you will, to raise an offspring in the wild. But these two elephants would be relegated to raising their calf alone, which is detrimental for so many reasons. And it could result in diminished health and well-being. And that would be consistent with the ICC's record of elephant births. And this is key. The ICC has never produced a calf that has lived past 3 years old. The calves they have produced have died for various captivity-related ailments before they reach maturity. And so we have to expect that if Victoria and Zuri give birth to calves, the same will result for those calves. And if a mother elephant in the wild loses a calf, it is a devastating experience, no less devastating in captivity, but we know how hard it is because we have anecdotes of elephants standing vigil over dead calves for days on end when they pass away in the wild. And of course, the zoo would not allow the calf that has passed away to be left at the ICC. They would remove it, causing additional harms to the mother elephant who could no longer observe that vigil for her lost newborn. Nonetheless, on December 29th, the Pittsburgh Zoo filed a motion to dismiss our habeas corpus petition filed in Allegheny County. Courtney, you can jump to the next one. On January 2nd, after that motion to dismiss was filed, Judge Mary McGinley of the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas issued two orders, which included a conditional show cause order. So in habeas corpus cases, two things have to happen, which is unlike traditional civil litigation. In traditional civil litigation, you file a complaint, the opposition files an answer, then you file a reply to that answer, and then the court either hears oral arguments or resolves the case on the papers. In habeas corpus cases, you file your initial habeas corpus petition, and before anything else can happen, which means before the opposition can file anything, the court actually has to review the petition and decide whether or not it makes what's called a prima facie case for relief. And if it does, that is, if you plead adequate facts, you make compelling legal arguments, the court will issue what's called a show cause order, which will then require the opposition to file a responsive document. But again, before the opposition can file a responsive document, that show cause order has to be issued. And so the zoo moved a little too quick by filing their motion to dismiss. And then we had kind of a status conference because the court was a bit confused as to why the zoo did that. And ultimately, what the court did was it issued the show cause order, allowing the motion to dismiss to become live, allowing us to respond to that motion to dismiss. But it wasn't a true show cause order. And what I mean by that is, and I know I'm getting a bit into the weeds here, but bear with me if you can. What the court said was, if you prevail, Non-Human Rights Project, on the motion to dismiss, then we'll hold an evidentiary hearing where you can bring your experts into court. You can put them, on the witness stand. You can examine them. The opposition can cross-examine them, and we'll go to the core of the case. We'll get to the essence of the case, but only, the court said, if you overcome the motion to dismiss. So the judge ultimately, a few days or a week or so later, consolidated both the petition from Allegheny County and Somerset County, making it one petition for all intents and purposes. So if we were able to defeat the motion to dismiss, the court would then hear evidence on both petitions, which means all elephants. So on January 22nd, we opposed the motion to dismiss. On February 9th, the Pittsburgh Zoo replied to that opposition. And then on February 12th, we were afforded oral arguments. So I went to Pittsburgh. I argued why the motion to dismiss should be denied, allowing our case to proceed to an evidentiary hearing, and the Pittsburgh Zoo argued in opposition. Unfortunately, the court granted the motion to dismiss and did so in what's called a bench order. Judge McGinley basically recused herself for 15 minutes after arguments concluded, went into her chambers, came back out 15 minutes later, and she read her decision, which more or less pretty much adopted the zoo's arguments. It was an unfortunate decision because we lost, obviously, but at the same time, it was so quickly rendered. Now, our cases are hundreds and hundreds of pages of arguments in science. And for a court to take so little time to come to a decision on a case of that volume really is disheartening and kind of echoed back to what Judge Hertzberg did. It's this knee-jerk reaction from these judges that is so hard to get past because they're not taking the time that's required by these cases. Nonetheless, after the motion to dismiss was granted, effectively ending the case, we got to work on our appeal. And on July 10th of this year, we filed our opening brief with the Superior Court of Pennsylvania, and the zoo has to file a response to that opening brief on September 9th. But I want to quickly go into the court's reasoning for granting the motion to dismiss and effectively denying our petitions before we jump into the questions. So the court said that the question that's right before this court is whether the term person extends to elephants. And this has been an issue in all of our cases, what this term person ultimately means. And it has become an issue because the way we proceed with these cases is we invoke this provision under Pennsylvania law in this case, other states' law in other cases, that says a person can seek habeas corpus relief. This term person is not defined, and the term person in a juridical sense, meaning a legal sense, is a non-biological classification that just means an individual has a legal right. And it's really no more complicated than that. And so what that means practically for our cases is that if the court ultimately grants the elephants the right we're seeking, which is the right to liberty, they necessarily become legal persons for purposes of habeas relief. But oftentimes, especially at the lowest court in states, judges get caught up with this term and they think it's synonymous with human, which it's not, which we know it's not because the legal term person has been extended to non-human entities the world over. And in this country, the best example is corporations. But nonetheless, the court would go on to say that, as I mentioned, the statute doesn't define the term, but it's subject, Courtney, if you could just jump back real quick. Thanks. The court would go on to say that the term person is not defined, but it's subject to what's called a statutory construction act, which is actually incorrect, but I don't need to go into the details of that. And then the court would say that if a statutory framework is ignored, which we advocate as a position because our cases are common law cases, not statutory cases, she would then say legal authority in other jurisdictions hasn't extended the category of person beyond human beings. And so, what this argument really is an argument for lack of precedent. It's an argument we see a lot because other courts haven't done it. We can't do it, which is not how the law is supposed to evolve, which is not how courts are supposed to evaluate what are called novel cases or cases of first impression, like all of ours are in these jurisdictions. The court shouldn't be looking to what New York, Hawaii, Michigan, Utah, etc. has done. It should be making a decision based on Pennsylvania law. And if it did that, then we would be able to prevail. But courts, especially again at the lowest level, are afraid to kind of step afield. So, Courtney, if you want to jump to the next slide, I think that might be our last on the court's decision making. So finally, the court would say, we lack standing, which was kind of a throwaway line, but standing is an essential component of all cases. Petitioners have to have standing to bring habeas corpus petitions. They have to have standing to file complaints in traditional civil litigation. Even in criminal law, individuals have to have standing to file those types of cases. Now, we undoubtedly had standing. We make that clear in our appellate brief. But it was disappointing again to see the court just say, correspondingly, we lack standing without any analysis as to our standing. And then finally, the court gave us some credit by saying that our case was seeking a laudable goal, and she recognized that elephants are remarkable non-humans, but ultimately granted the motion to dismiss and said this type of case is best left to the legislature. And again, we respond to all these arguments in our appellate brief. We tried to preempt them by making those arguments in our underlying habeas corpus petition as to why these reasons should not be given, but clearly the court was not persuaded. And I think we'll get to this in the Q&A section, but the state trial courts in all the states we litigate in are simply disinclined to grant the relief we're seeking. And we understand that going in. It doesn't mean we prepare any less intensively, or I personally think we don't have a chance. But at the same time, we have to understand that if change is going to happen in the law, a change of this magnitude as the courts see it, it's going to have to come from a state Supreme Court. And so a lot of the work we do at the lower court is in preparation of that ultimate appeal to the state Supreme Court. Courtney, if there's another slide, you can jump to that. Okay. And that's really the case timeline and where the case stands. In conclusion, we're on appeal, and if that appeal fails, then file our final appeal to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Okay, so we got a ton of questions in advance, so I'm gonna try to get through some of them and then we'll get through some of the questions you all are asking right now. And the first question we got is if judges have ever expressed their opinions to us about on their cases. And I think this sort of goes to something that we got recently in Michigan. But I'll take a quick stab at that, and then Jake, I'll let you. But judges have expressed their opinions to us, and they do through their opinions, their concurrences and dissenting opinions. We've gotten several favorable opinions. Unfortunately, they haven't been in the majority. We got an amazing concurring opinion in a case we filed in New York on behalf of chimpanzees Tommy and Kiko. It was written by Judge Fahey, who was a judge on the highest court in New York, the New York Court of Appeals. And in his opinion, he said chimpanzees they may not be a person, but they are not merely a thing. We also got two amazing dissents in our case on behalf of Happy, an elephant held captive at the Bronx Zoo. And recently we got an amazing dissent in our case on behalf of 7 chimpanzees held captive at a roadside zoo in Michigan. And while it's really disappointing we did not prevail in that case, the decision we got from Justice Welch was incredible. And Jake, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that and your opinions or your thoughts on how judges express their opinions on our cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to remember that the work we are doing has been described as more difficult than suffrage, abolition, child labor laws, and you name it combined. And that's because inherently as a society, we have always exploited non-human animals. I think that there is a valid argument to be made that society would not have made it to where we are today without the exploitation of animals. And so this preconceived notion that we can use animals however we want is so ingrained within us that to overcome it is going to take a monumental effort. Now we're prepared to put forward that effort, but it's not going to happen overnight. And we are not going to prevail in our first cases, which has proven true. But what has happened is every 4 years for the last 12 years, we have received at least one opinion that has been written favorably to our arguments. And in my opinion, that is an incredibly rapid clip of judges coming around to the arguments we're making. And it's only a matter of time before we reach that critical mass where a court can't say anything to deny us relief and has to afford us the relief we're seeking. And as Courtney mentioned, the first opinion was written by Judge Eugene Fahey of the New York Court of Appeals. 4 years later, we received an opinion by two judges on that same court. And then last month, we got an opinion from a state Supreme Court judge in Michigan, speaking to the power and the validity of our arguments. And in every case we subsequently bring, we use those opinions to make our arguments, and our arguments in turn get stronger and stronger. And it will only be a matter of time before we prevail. But the fight is it is, as I said, monumental. And so we're up against a lot. But with these opinions, we're able to rely on them for ultimately, achieving what we set out to do. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that this will be a protracted process, as frustrating as that may be.
Yeah. Another question we got is if the elephants are outside all winter long at the zoo, if they're still housed in, I'm assuming the old barn at the Pittsburgh Zoo, and if it's difficult for visitors to see elephants at the breeding center, the ICC. I'll say the elephants are not outside all winter long. I don't know if it's better or worse to be outside in the cold weather or to be inside in the incomprehensibly small barn that both Jake, Kelly, and I have seen. And the barn is like it truly can't. It's one of those things you have to see it to believe it, just how small it is. But it's concrete flooring. There is no enrichment, not like any enrichment can provide any sort of mental stimulation that would be sufficient for an elephant. The environment, the Pittsburgh Zoo and the ICC are cannot meet the complex needs of elephants, and they are suffering every day physically and psychologically. But they do spend, when it's too cold, their time inside the barn. And the ICC, you can see them. I believe it's through their. It's most of the year. You have to buy a ticket, which is not cheap. You can do a wagon ride across the property where you can see elephants, and they also have camels and I believe bison. Or you can buy I believe it's $175 a person to do an elephant encounter, where you can see the elephants closer. You can't like touch them, but you have a more personal experience with elephants, which is not something a sanctuary would do. So when they describe themselves as such, you can see it's just another way to exploit the elephants for profit by breeding them and also getting people to pay a significant amount of money to have an up close experience with the elephants. Jake, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Nothing to add. I thought that was a great answer.
Um, so this is a question, Jake, I will let you take this. Why do we not rely on uh, a dissent that is well known by the Chief Justice of Canada in our petitions?
Yeah, this is a great question. And admittedly, I did not have an opportunity to reread the opinion. I think the case was Reese versus Edmonton. I had read it in the past, and I will say that that opinion has been brought into our cases through amicus briefs. Specifically, a Canadian law professor had cited that opinion in an amicus brief she filed in one of our previous cases. She will be filing an amicus brief in a case we have that's upcoming before the Hawaii Supreme Court, and I imagine she'll invoke that case again. But as I remember that opinion, it focused a lot on standing, and it was in the Canadian context, so not directly applicable to the states. And although it did have really strong language about society's obligations toward elephants, we have dissenting opinions in the states that say the same thing, specifically the opinions of the now Chief Judge of the New York Court of Appeals, Rowan Wilson, and his colleague, Jenny Rivera. And when we cite international decisions, we try to only cite decisions that have conferred rights. And we do that because dissenting opinions are only persuasive. And it's our belief that the dissenting opinion of an international judge would be even less persuasive than a US judge. And so we want to focus on those cases that have actually afforded relief to animals. And that's why we haven't relied on that case. However, I am going to look at that case again. I think there may be some language that we can use moving forward. So I really appreciate that question and whomever asked it for raising that decision, which I hadn't looked at in a few years.
Another question we got is if we document our clients' distress, and we do extensively. Before we file a case, before we decide who we're going to take on as clients, we go and visit the facilities we're considering, the clients we're considering, and we get an assessment of how they're doing. And at the Pittsburgh Zoo, their distress has been extensively documented both by us and by other people, people who have made documentaries about the zoo, people who have gone to the zoo. There are other organizations who have advocated for the elephants of the Pittsburgh Zoo. The Pittsburgh Zoo has been notoriously bad about how they treat their elephants. Not that any zoo treats their elephants well, but they voluntarily relinquished their AZA accreditation. And by saying that, I don't want to give any uh, sort of credence to having AZA accreditation. It's no more than a self-regulating agency, or not even agency, trade organization, but they voluntarily relinquished their accreditation because they didn't want to comply with new standards for the handling of elephants. So, over the decades, the distress of the Pittsburgh Zoo elephants have been well documented, and we have been documenting it as well. And as I stated, and as our experts analyze the elephants, all the elephants of the Pittsburgh Zoo exhibit stereotypic behavior. And, we do post this on social media and on our website, but if anyone wants to see more of it, feel free to send us an email, and I'm happy to send all of the footage we have of the elephants engaging in distress. Um, but we try to keep it at a minimum so that you all don't have to watch it endlessly. But yeah, that's all I have to say on that. Jake, do you have anything to add?
No, no, I thought that was very
Okay.
well.
Um, I will let you take this next question. Do you think the recent transfers were initiated to complicate and thereby weaken our case?
That's a really good question. I could only speculate. There's no way to know for sure unless a whistleblower of some kind came forward and told us as much. So I think the most strategic answer would be just to say, I don't know. I mean, it's possible. It's possible, absolutely. Zoos have a vested interest in keeping these elephants behind bars, so I wouldn't put it past them.
Next question. I wonder what is known about the two Canadian elephants who have been transferred to the zoo, and will they be included in the lawsuit? So I'll just talk about who the elephants are, and then I'll let Jake take the second half. The two elephants who were imported to the US to the facilities operated by the Pittsburgh Zoo, the ICC, and the zoo were or are Carol and Jeannot. They are 42-year-old wild-born African elephants who were held captive together at the Parc Safari near Quebec. They were a bonded pair of elephants who had lived together for a significant period of time. And the Pittsburgh Zoo decided to separate them. So they just keep separating elephants for their own purposes, not for the elephants' interests. Um, and Carol was sent to the Pittsburgh Zoo, where she's now confined with Tasha. And Jeannot was sent to the ICC, where he is being used for breeding with all of the females. And the zoo stated that they intend to breed all of the females, even the older female elephants, at the ICC. And the ICC now has 9 elephants. And Jake, do we have any intention of including Carol and Jeannot in our case?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. At this current procedural posture of the case, which is seeking appellate review, there really isn't a practical way to add those elephants. If the court ultimately remands the case to the lower court for an evidentiary hearing, which is what we're seeking, that would afford us an opportunity to add any and all elephants that have since been transferred into the Pittsburgh Zoo or the ICC. And that would be effectively the plan for us. But again, at this nuanced procedural posture, we can't add them to the appeal. So hopefully we get the remand and we can bring them into the case.
Great. Next question. I'm interested in hearing about the long game in this work on behalf of elephants' autonomy. If the appeal is denied, what is the next steps for NhRP's involvement in Pittsburgh? Is it expected that the case will be denied up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court? Can or would a different case be brought? I'm assuming if it's denied by the Supreme Court. And what about legislative action? So, Jake, I don't know if you want to talk about the legal sort of our end game,
Yeah.
and uh, and then I can talk about legislative action.
Yeah, our end game is ultimately to prevail on behalf of these elephants and have them either relocated to an accredited sanctuary or rewilded in their native and ancestral lands. If we lose at the Superior Court, which is effectively Pennsylvania's Intermediate Court of Appeals, then we will appeal the case to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And again, for all intents and purposes, and I know it's really frustrating because not only do our cases, take a long time, but they have to go through three different court levels. But for all intents and purposes, the state Supreme Court needs to be the court to change the law because otherwise, a higher court could just weigh in and change the law back to what it was if we prevailed at the lower court or intermediate court, excuse me. So again, we're practicing, we're prepping for that Supreme Court hearing if we're afforded one. And if we ultimately do not prevail at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, we're hopeful that we'll receive at least one favorable opinion, whether it's a dissenting opinion, a concurring opinion, or something else. And then we always evaluate our additional legal options if these initial cases fail. But I can't speak to what another case may look like because we just haven't done that research yet as we're focused wholly on this case.
And I'll just say with legislative action, that's something we'll consider after the case concludes, like we did in Happy's case. We worked with the New York City Council to introduce a captivity ban after the case concluded. So we don't do legislation and litigation in tandem at the same time in the same jurisdiction. So that's something that we could consider after the case concludes. So at this time, no. But if you do live in Pittsburgh or if you live in Pennsylvania, it is always great to have elected officials in the area come out in support of the recognition of the elephant's right to liberty and their release to a sanctuary or a rewilding facility. So if you live in the state of Pennsylvania, please contact your elected officials and ask them to come out and publicly call on the Pittsburgh Zoo to voluntarily send the elephants to a sanctuary or issue any sort of public statement supportive of ending elephant captivity or the elephant's right to liberty. And we're happy to help you in contacting your elected officials if that's something you're interested in doing. Um, I know we have a
Courtney,
lot of questions. Oh, sorry.
I wanted to jump in because I accidentally resolved a question I had intended to answer in the chat. And
Okay.
that was, is there any reason for celebration currently? And I want to reiterate this dissenting opinion from Michigan. I know that we were not able to prevail on behalf of those chimpanzees. And I know that it can be frustrating to hear that we should be celebrating an opinion that did not afford us the relief we sought. But the law changes through dissenting opinions. It has changed at every turn in our society through what was once dissenting opinions becoming majority opinions. And without these dissenting opinions, like the one we just received from Justice Elizabeth Welsh in Michigan, like we received from the judges on the New York Court of Appeals, we would not be able to prevail one day. The law would never change because it doesn't just happen overnight. There needs to be compelling reasons. There needs to be logical reasons provided by other judges for the ones down the road to ultimately agree with us. So we should be celebrating and screaming it from the treetops that this dissent in Michigan is a watershed moment for the movement for animal rights at large. And I can't reiterate that enough. And I do know it's frustrating because it's a dissenting opinion. But without this, there would be no change. So, yes, there is immense cause for celebration that we received yet another opinion that was favorable to our arguments.
I think it also, adding to that, like we have had such success, like the fact that we were even, or I don't know if everyone knows, but the Hawaii Supreme Court granted cert in our case, and Jake will be arguing that in November. So the fact that these high courts are taking these issues seriously, hearing our cases is also a monumental victory. And, with the dissents that, like the dissent we just got by Justice Welsh and the dissents we've gotten previously, that only helps our cases, and they can be used in our filings in Pittsburgh, and in future cases that we bring. So, yes, it's you in these difficult fights, you have to look at these wins, which are major wins. And I know it's difficult to say that when our clients and the animals remain languishing in their captivity. And we continue to advocate for them because obviously, like, they need to be freed, whether it's through our cases or through some other means. Like, we continue to advocate for our clients' freedom. But these are monumental wins, whether it's a court agreeing to hear our case, a dissenting opinion written, someone notable coming out in support of our cases, the fact that we have the foremost experts in elephant cognition and behavior and scientists submitting declarations and affidavits in our cases is so powerful. So we've had a lot of wins, and I just want to know, two of our clients are in sanctuary. Hercules and Leo, two chimpanzees we represented who are at a university in New York, are living at Project Chimps. They're enjoying their autonomy. They live with respect and dignity. Both Jake and I have visited Project Chimps. I had the privilege of seeing Hercules when I was there. And it's incredible. So there have been successes. And I just want to just emphasize that. We had a lot more questions, but I want to look at the questions in the chat to make sure we're not neglecting anyone. Jake, are there any that you see that stood
I've
out, or I can?
I've been trying to respond to most of them, but
Okay.
if you want to
Okay.
identify a few, feel free as I continue to type away.
Okay. Yeah, Jake and I can talk forever about elephants in our cases. I'll just go through then some of the questions that we got. Someone asked, they said, the average person in Pittsburgh doesn't really know what's going on. Is there a way to get more media attention? What can people in Pittsburgh and elsewhere do? Um, Pittsburgh is a large city, so I'm not surprised that most people don't know about this. So we have gotten a significant amount of media attention, especially when we filed and we've had these hearings. Um, and so we have gotten a good amount of local media attention for the elephants. And, ideally, obviously, we'd have more. And so as we continue on, we try to find ways to get local media and national media involved. We've held two rallies outside the zoo that have gotten really good local support. We've had, people attend, and then, we stand with signs and we've gotten a lot of supportive honks and people taking flyers. I think Kelly can I don't know if she in the chat or maybe afterwards, if you do live in the Pittsburgh area, we do have a flyer if you'd like to post on social. It has like QR codes and you can post it if you want to print it around the community. And we also have action alerts that anyone, you don't have to live in Pittsburgh, can do. So if anyone lives in Pittsburgh and has ideas for us to get more support and awareness about the case, please let us know. Any of us, we'd be happy to take that. And if you know a Steelers player who would like to take on this cause with the NFL season starting soon, we would love to get in touch with them. Or a Pirates player, any of them. Um, I'll look at the questions that have been asked in the Q&A, so we're not neglecting that. Um, uh, uh,
We did have two questions about how we select our cases.
Yeah, great question. We looked at two things. We looked to the conditions of our potential clients, the situation in Pittsburgh for the five elephants we filed our initial petition on behalf of was incredibly dire. I think the best word to describe that elephant enclosure at the Pittsburgh Zoo is harsh, maybe even brutal. It's really tragic. So we look to where the greatest need is, and then we also consider the state's common law, which is the type of law that we bring our legal claims under.
yes, that's a good answer. And we typically do go, or not typically, we always go and visit the facility and look at the clients just to ensure. We want to make sure, like Jake said, like we look at the common law to make sure the state that we are going to be filing in has strong case law. We look at the community that we're filing in, if this will be receptive, not like that's necessarily determinative of whether we're going to file, and also if there are multiple possible clients who is in the most desperate need of relief and to have their rights recognized. And there was a question, and now I can't find it, but it sort of goes to why we advocate for rights rather than welfare. It was I forget what it was. It was something along the lines, about oh my gosh. It was aren't there federal protections, federal and state protections for the elephants that we could utilize? And there are, federal and state laws related to animal cruelty, but the zoo isn't violating those, to our knowledge. I mean, the laws protecting elephants and many animals are slim to none, and they allow for a lot of husbandry standards and treatment that are known to cause extreme suffering for elephants. And the only way to truly protect elephants from human-caused harm is to recognize their right to liberty. They cannot, any form of captivity causes them to suffer greatly. Um, and that, they do suffer in sanctuaries. Like they do not have full freedom of movement. They don't have, you know, full control. And sanctuaries even state that. But it's the best possible option for elephants in the United States who cannot be rewilded. But ultimately, what we want to see is for elephants to be living freely in their natural habitat where they can enjoy their autonomy. And yeah, so while animal welfare laws are important, because until there are rights, like those are the only things that are protecting animals from the most cruelest forms of treatment. We seek rights because animal welfare laws are insufficient, and also because elephants inherently have the right to liberty, and that's what we're seeking to have vindicated through our cases. Jake, I don't know if you want to add.
No, that was a great answer. No, you're so right.
Um, I don't know if there are, Jake, you're really going through all these.
Yeah,
We
trying
do.
to make sure everybody has their question answered.
Okay.
Courtney,
Uh,
there's one question about just info on who to contact, but I believe you covered that.
oh
And
yeah. We right now we have so we do new action alerts, but right now our current action alert is directed to the director or CEO and president of the Pittsburgh Zoo and also the director of the ICC. So Kelly can share that link. It's also on the client page of our website. When you go to our website, go to clients, and you'll see the Pittsburgh elephants. You just click take action, and it will take you to our most recent action alert. So you can do that. And one person asked, and this probably is something you answer, Jake, and I can take a stab at this because uh, I can talk endlessly about elephant breeding, but why is the zoo breeding elephants? Is this a top priority for them?
yeah,
Yes. Yes. The zoo is breeding elephants because it makes them money. Um, a baby elephant, if anyone's been following Lynn Mai at the National Zoo, Smithsonian National Zoo, there's been so much coverage on her birth. She's an Asian elephant who was born at the National Zoo in February of this year. She was rejected by her mother. She's been hand raised by keepers. She has been documented endlessly and exploited by the zoo for profit and praise. And nothing about her life is natural. She's been shown on CNN playing in a plastic pool with bubbles. CNN journalist Dana Bash fed her with a bottle and was somehow amazed by that rather than disgusted. And horrified that an elephant is being raised this way. As Jake mentioned, and as our elephant experts talk about, elephants are raised by a group of female elephants. They're familial herd. They're not hand raised by humans, and that should not be seen as a conservational success. Lynn Mai, any elephants born at the Pittsburgh Zoo or the ICC are going to spend their entire lives in captivity. That is not helping wild elephants in any way. That is helping zoos make more money by creating more elephants and bringing them into a system that causes them endless suffering. It's a perpetual cycle. If Angeline, Zuri, or Victoria give birth, that is just a second generation of captive elephants. It's captive elephants, captive born elephants are producing more elephants. It's just the they are so far removed, like physically, from the wild. Genetically, they're still wild elephants. So it's so frustrating to hear zoos talk as if, these elephants need humans. No, no, they don't. We are just causing them harm. Um, and we are forcing them to be dependent on us because they have no other options. When you see keepers or zoos talking about how elephants have bonded with their keepers, well, what else are they supposed to do? That's who gives them food. Elephants who are held solitarily, their keepers are the only form of social interaction they get. Um, this is literally a prison system for elephants. Elephants are prisoners. The keepers are their prison guards. The zoo directors are the wardens. That is the system that we are working against.
Okay, everyone, we are at time. Thank you so much, everyone, for the thoughtful questions. We are going to be following up with an email with some of the action alerts that Courtney talked about, and any other links that could be helpful based on the conversations we had today. And if you weren't able to catch everything on the webinar, we are going to be posting this recorded webinar on our YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that. And as I mentioned earlier, this webinar kicks off our World Elephant Month campaign. So this is just the beginning of what's coming this month. So make sure you're subscribed to our emails and following us on social so you don't miss any action alerts. And if you're able to, we would be so grateful if you'd consider donating and supporting our work. Every bit makes a difference and helps us continue fighting for our clients' right to liberty. So thanks everyone for joining us. And Jake, Courtney, thank you so much for hosting this and sharing all of the thoughtful conversation with us.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Kelly. Thank you all for the support. It means a lot.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.